Yeah. I think consulting is a really exciting way to learn about the entire field of business and to rotate through tremendous skills training early in your career. From consulting, you can exit into anything else you want, so it's the perfect millennial career because you're able to do absolutely anything after getting great training and experience. Consulting is a very people-oriented business, and the interview process is very verbal, and I find that a lot of people spend most of their time reading and gathering knowledge and information when just a little bit of out loud practice with really honest feedback and communication can be the best tip for breaking into the industry. So Management Consulted is actually the world's leading website on consulting. We have over 2 million readers every year, and we publish really honest, really rich content on the consulting field, specific firms, case interviews, how to break in, and also just the value of consulting skills in general. We also offer services, boot camps, and products that help people determine whether they want a career in consulting, prepare for the interview process, and ultimately become successful consultants.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
As I was traveling globally, it's one of the most creative pursuits on the earth that you can spend your life pursuing. And it's a great way to solve problems. It's a great way to develop relationships, and something that I really fell in love with. So I then did the next wrong thing, which was I moved on a one-way ticket to South Africa to start a business. Not the most rational move. And after 3 months in South Africa, started a business where I coordinated public and private funding for small businesses and worked with them to basically build coalitions between small businesses so they could get better access to financing from the government. How many of you guys know what prime interest rate is? Come on, anybody? Oh no, this is bad. All right, I'm going to have to start at the very beginning. Anyhow, prime interest rate is basically the interest rate that a government sets to lend money to and from its own national banks, is the easiest way to describe it. Basically the baseline interest rate. And the prime interest rate in South Africa was 14% when I was there. So to borrow money from a bank, they usually would lend it at more than 14%, which is the equivalent of essentially like putting a business loan on a credit card. Right? So it was really difficult for small businesses to grow unless they had cash, which very few of them did. Anyhow, I solved that problem by building this business that was really awesome, and I thought I would do it for the whole rest of my life. And I went back to the US for a wedding, and one of my friends works for McKinsey, who was in the wedding with me. And she did what I call the McKinsey hustle. Have any of you guys ever talked to somebody at McKinsey? Raise your hand.
Have we talked to someone?
Yeah, talk to someone at McKinsey. Yeah. So McKinsey people are super nice, very open, but by the end of a 30-minute conversation with them, you're dying to work for McKinsey, right? Like dying, like left arm, I will just leave it with you. Please just let me work at McKinsey. So she convinced me to spend my 4-week holiday in the US studying for case interviews and interviewing for McKinsey, which I just still think is one of the biggest coups of my life up until this point. But she also said, hey, while you're interviewing for McKinsey, you should interview for Bain and BCG at the same time. And so I was like, fine, whatever. I networked a little bit and ended up getting interviews. I was kind of in this sweet spot time frame of when they were recruiting and hiring. And so I did a case interview with her 1 week later. All right. For any of you guys that feel like you have to be a natural at case interviews, let me tell you what she told me. She said, "You are the worst case interviewer I have ever seen." Literally. And she said, "You have all of these jumbled up ideas of what you want to do and what you want to talk about. You have all this theory from your classes and from the things that you've seen around the world, and you cannot solve a business problem if your life depended on it," which is not super encouraging because my first interview with McKinsey was 1 week from that day. But what was super helpful was that she was really honest with me, and she told me a couple of the things that I really needed to do. And actually about 2 weeks later, when I finished the interview process, I got an offer on the spot with Bain. And here's what they told me. They said, "You're our #1 recruit," which was super hilarious after her feedback, 2 weeks before. But what they said is that you actually did a really good job solving the case interview. You figured it out. Good job. Way to go. But the most important thing is that you actually demonstrate a real passion for business that we don't see very often for people at your level. And that distinguishes you amongst everyone else. So you can just come to Bain, please, but pick an office where you want to work. And so I did multiple sell weekends and multiple offices for Bain, and I ultimately chose the Atlanta office. And I worked in Atlanta for 2.5 years for 11 different cases and 10 different industries, and I loved my time at Bain. I got promoted. I did really well when I was there, and I had another offer for promotion on the table, but I decided to leave Bain and to start my own business along with a couple of other people. So I worked in 2 startups. One was in battery technology, and the second one was in payments technology. In fact, those of you guys that have an iPhone 6, the iPhone 6 comes with the payment technology that our company developed. And so we had an exit in my early 30s, and I essentially retired, but I don't really do very well retiring. It's not really my jam. So I wanted to come back and do something for the consulting industry and kind of help people get in, and also help develop some of the tools and skills that I found really valuable throughout my career. So I love travel and international stuff. I love wild things. I sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, and I also love business. How about that? So hopefully you guys are in the same boat and are interested in consulting and other wild business ventures as well. So what we do at Management Consulted, we build firm profiles, Q&As, and a whole bunch of free content. If you have not been on the website, please go and check it out. Our things are not like, here is everything that's great about Bain, right? But it's like, here's why you wouldn't want to work at a place like Accenture. Because sometimes I just found it really hard to piece through all of the fluffy stuff that everybody said in all of their presentations. Like, it was like, well, clearly you're going to tell me why you want to work there, but who's ever going to tell me why not? And so that's what we're here for. We also do these consulting boot camps like today and Saturday's event, and then we have a bunch of self-study training materials. And tonight, like I said, I actually believe that the consulting mindset and process starts really early. Like, the whole thing is not just the case interview, and being good at the case interview involves understanding how consultants operate and think. So that's really helpful. By the way, is anyone dying in this room? Is it like 1,000,000 degrees? For some reason, the whole week since I've been here, it's been like, early fall outside and like the dead of winter inside. It is so hot. Thank you. Okay, awesome. So, and our clients go everywhere. So I went to Bain, and I believe really strongly in Bain. I had a great experience there. I didn't leave because I hated it. But I am really happy to talk really honestly about Bain, and I'm also happy to talk about a lot of the other firms that we work with, people who get into the firms, who want to get out of the firms, who want to transition between the firms. So anything that you guys want to know, please ask me tonight, and if I know, I'll tell you. Consulting 101, many roads lead to consulting. Just really quickly, background on consulting. Consulting basically started at the turn of the 20th century. And here's something really important to know. If you become a consultant, no one will have any idea what you do. No one, okay? Including you, potentially, right? And so for the first 3 months while I was at Bain, I was like, I don't even know what we do, but I just come to work every day, and I hope that I'm going to help to solve a business problem somehow. And so about 3 months after being on the job, it finally clicked. I was flying first class back from a client engagement, feeling like a total poser, 24 in first class with all these 55-year-old white men, and one of them asks me what do you do, right? So I say, well, I'm a consultant, and he was like, everyone's a consultant. My grandmother's a consultant. Well, what kind of consultant are you? And so I said, well, I work for Bain & Company, and it was like blank stare, right? So I said, okay, here's what we do. We are business doctors that go into a business, and we explain what is happening in the business and what they should do differently to help them grow the business. And he said, well, isn't that what every consultant does? I said, well, we work specifically for CEOs of $1 billion or larger companies on one of their top 3 strategic initiatives. And I was like, ding, 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 that's what I do, I still had no idea what I was supposed to do all day, by the way. That came later. But here are the things that consultants have been doing since the beginning of the 20th century. They've been external advisors who've come in to provide research, analysis, and business advice. Okay? So now the next awkward question comes in my conversation with this guy, which is, how are you able to do that? Aren't you, basically, freshly graduated from college? And I was like, oh no, I have 3 years of work experience, right? I'm a super expert. And I obviously didn't have a lot to say in that conversation, but what I discovered over my time at Bain was that my answer to that question should have been, we actually don't consult based on expertise. And that's why I can consult with you. We consult based on tools. And the tools are things that we get trained on from the beginning of our time there. And ultimately, probably, I would say for you guys, if you're sitting in this room, the number one reason why you should want to go into consulting of any kind, but especially consulting at some of the top firms, because they use different tools at different consulting firms. You're going to get trained on them, and the best tools are usually paid the highest price for, which are the ones at the top firms. So the projects that you do are also classified by the project owner. So how many of you guys know that every firm is going to tell you that you'll do strategy work, right? Because that's like the sexiest stuff, okay? But not all strategy is created equal. There's strategy for a CEO, which is company strategy. And then there is line item or project strategy. Like, for example, Accenture is a great example of a firm. Accenture strategy does not work for CEOs. Accenture strategy works for CTOs. They do technology strategy. So they come in, they assess your current technology, they tell you where your technology should be, and then they recommend themselves to come and build the technology. It's a brilliant business model, right? But it's not strategy in the way that a CEO would think about their own strategy. It's not how do you increase your sales or decrease your costs, okay? CFO, financial advisory strategy, is how to allocate your resources amongst different options that you have inside an organization. So you guys have to get smart when you're thinking about and talking about and making a strategy for consulting, because like I'm guessing that probably a lot of you in this room would like to work for McKinsey, Bain, and BCG. It's not always the way that it works out. And so there are many other pathways that lead to either an option at that firm or to the types of tools and skills that you want. But you have to know what you're looking for and what they're going to train you in to know which one to pick and which one to go after. The average project lengths in consulting are 3 to 6 months. This is very cool and unique. Does anybody know what the average project length at an investment bank is? Yeah.
Maybe slightly shorter?
Definitely shorter. Yeah, usually 1 month or less, actually. Guess what? At an investment bank, you know what the biggest complaint is? They do the same thing over and over again. Over and over and over again. So during your time there, you do exactly the same project, just for different deals. All right? So one of the reasons why people go into consulting, by the way, it's not the pay. You get paid more in investment banking. So if you want to get a big paycheck on the day that you leave LSE, good for you, go to investment banking. Totally best place to go. If you probably want the best training for a lifetime in business, I would go to consulting, okay? And you'll find actually a lot of people who have a major inheritance or a family business that they want to go run, their family send them to consulting. They're like, that's where you should go get your training, right? And the reason is that you have these 3 to 6 month projects, which is long enough to develop some insight, but not long enough to get bored. In multiple different industries and multiple different business problems. And the luxury of the way that consulting works is that you are allowed to be terrible for 1 whole year, okay? Because you're on a team of people, like 6 people, and 5 of them have to be good and 1 of you can be terrible. So the first year that you come in, you can know nothing and do a terrible job and essentially contribute nothing, and you have that whole year to rotate through lots of different knowing nothings until at 1 year, somebody else comes in who knows nothing and you have to know something, all right? So the cool thing about that is that they actually, for that whole year, give you the luxury of not really contributing, right? Which means that you have a super fast learning curve in that year because you don't have to become an expert at anything in a really short amount of time. The other thing that's really novel about it is that you don't have a boss or a supervisor. You work on teams. The teams are meant, well, you know, if I'm thinking about running a world-dominating consulting firm, what I want are people who are completely interchangeable, right? So I want to be like, you can do a financial model. Uh-oh, I need you on this different project. I need you to do the financial model, right? Now I need you to build a presentation and you to do customer research. And but the next time I need you to do exactly the opposite thing of that. So I do not want to build experts. I want to build a pool of equally trained people that I can deploy on a whole bunch of different things. And those 4 to 10 person teams rotate, which means that you guys have to be really great at working with all kinds of different people because I'm just going to keep moving you from team to team, and every team has to be incredible, right? So we're paying, the firms are paying top dollar for you. So you don't have a boss, which is great, yay. The bad thing is that everybody then evaluates you. So you have sometimes 6 to 8 people every time you're on a project who will give you an evaluation. It keeps everybody generally in line. Like some people are still really terrible teammates. But for the most part, what that does is it means that because everybody is watching you and you're not just like trying to please just one person, it creates a more collaborative environment, which is again very different than some other places where you guys could go. Good training for business leadership. Do you guys know why? Why do consultants make good business leaders later?
They are learning from mistakes?
That's maybe part of it. It's not quite what I'm looking for. Somebody else? Yeah.
First, because they're constantly working within a team, so they gain those leadership skills.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're exposed to, CFOs, CEOs, CTOs, and they can learn from them, and they're interacting with top level.
That's part of it. Actually, like working in a team is actually not very helpful when you're an actual leader in a business. You have to be kind of backstabbing, to be honest, in most businesses. If you want to be in middle management, it's super helpful. but being a leader, in fact, that's why you find that like a lot of these really famous, bajillionaires are like super loners, right? Because they're unafraid to do completely ridiculous things and start a business that's multiple $1 billion that might fail, but they also don't really like have a team. They have a team that does stuff for them, but not like a team. The main reason I would say, after being in the field, is that they're faster at making hard decisions. Okay? And they make them more clearly than people do that don't have this kind of training. And one of the constant things that you're asking yourself in consulting, because you come in from the outside of a business, is what matters, what doesn't? What matters, what doesn't? And honestly, like that is the biggest problem in most businesses today, is that nobody can tell you. They say everything matters, and they have no idea how to deploy resources or efforts. It doesn't mean that being a consultant makes you a good business person, by the way. There are a lot of people who actually really struggle when they move into industry from consulting, because you have the privilege of being on the outside and having the luxury of like being able to make those choices, and the noise that comes at you can really frenzy that decision-making process, but it does at least give you the tools on how to do it, which is cool. The other reason that I think people like to go in and should go in is that you get an accelerated career path. Dog years, consultant years. Right? 5 years in industry is like 2 years in consulting. So you get paid more quickly. When you leave, you get to exit into higher positions with more responsibility of other places. So, staying in a consulting firm for a couple of years, maybe getting an MBA and then even going back to a consulting firm means that you're basically at like P&L manager or, very senior level positions, 15 to 18 years that somebody in industry would have had to like work their way up on, which is a pretty unique opportunity. Okay, a couple of the firms. What's different about these three types of firms? You guys probably know that they're different, but might not know why. Sure.
So we know why the big strategy houses, top three, and maybe then we have.
But what's different about them?
About the three of them, or within the?
No, the top three versus Big Four versus Tier 2.
Well, Big Four also offers implementation. Most of them and other professional services. So they're just stepping into management consulting. And when it comes to Tier 2, they're more specialized, some of them, when it comes to technology or financial services.
So you're telling me everything that they told you, but let me tell you why you guys really want to know the difference, okay? These guys get paid the most. Okay, they get paid $500,000 or 400,000 pounds a month for 6 people to work on a project as an external advisor, which means that on average, one of you working there is making $1 million for the company, okay, for the year. So you guys know what your salaries would be when you come in, right? It's not you that's making the money, by the way. The partners are making big dollars here, right? But what does that mean? What that means, the other thing that's really unique about this is that an invoice from one of these firms looks like this. 1 project, 6 people, 1 month, 400,000 pounds. They do not account for hours. They do not account for project deliverables. They account just for a block of time that they give you, okay? And it's amazing because what that means is that at these firms, if you learn how to work smart, you do not have to work hard, okay? And that is totally true. So at my first year at Bain, I worked like 60 to 80 hours because I could not work smart. I didn't know how to. I'd never done anything before. I had no idea how to do it. In my second year at Bain, I worked an average of 20 to 25 hours a week. Okay, I was in the office more than that, but I wasn't always working. And I would have told you, even while I was at Bain during that time, like, I worked my brains out, because you're conditioned to tell everybody how hard you're working, because if you don't, then they'll give you more work, right? But ultimately, I did not have to account for my hours. I never had to tell a client how many hours I worked on their project. I just had to give them what they needed, what they had paid us to do at the end of the day. Okay? For these guys, their biggest part of their revenues is from tax and audit. Tax and audit are by the hour. So you will be accounting for every single one of your hours, and the firm's getting paid less as well. So you have a different culture, a bigger overall ecosphere. These firms are all smaller than these guys are, right? And so you have a different kind of culture and also a different incentive for what you deliver at the end of the day. But here it is maximum number of hours that you work in order to deliver a project, okay? And what that means is not just maximum number of hours in a day or a week, but also maximum number of hours on a project. So your projects here are longer because they roll in more into implementation. Right, so here you do fewer projects, higher paid, less accountability for the actual hours you spend, just smart deliverables. Here you do, again, really great work, great firms to work for, just totally different process and culture. What about these guys, the tier 2s? Where do they fit in? Who are they more like, Big 4 or top 3? They're actually more like top 3. These guys, they have a very similar price point to these guys. But they just focus on specific areas. So who knows what LEK focuses on? Healthcare and life sciences, actually, is what they focus on. If they come to do a presentation, they'll tell you they do strategy and that they work in every industry. They will tell you that, okay? Because that's what you all want to hear. But what they really do, mostly, is healthcare and life sciences. So while you're there, you might do a strategy project on a, consumer products firm. You might. They do projects like that, but the majority of their work, which is what you're going to ultimately end up doing the majority of your work on, is going to be healthcare and life sciences. Oliver Wyman is financial services, okay? Again, they have broad spectrums. They have other things that they do. They sell other projects. Great firm, but it's not the kind of breadth that you're talking about here. OC&C kind of fits in the Oliver Wyman category too. Again, wonderful firm. Accenture, technology, like we talked about before. What about A.T. Kearney? Yeah.
Is it automotive industry?
So automotive, but they actually aren't as industry focused as they are specialty focused. Sorry, I just dropped my water bottle in there. I'll come back in just a second. Their focus is on supply chain, sourcing, and operations. Yeah, so all of the back office cost saving stuff. Okay, here we go. Goody. And then the other one that was on there was Strategy N. So Strategy N focuses a lot on. Actually, you want to know the truth? Strategy N doesn't even know what they focus on. And I would not go work there right now because they're trying to figure it out. That's the total truth. Their focus before was actually on a lot of pricing and government or federal strategy for both in the U.S. and overseas. Really dominated by their U.S. office, and when they tried to bail abroad, they had a really hard time figuring out how to do that, which is why they got acquired. So yeah, let's see this. If this is going to come back up for us. Let me take any questions about consulting.
That specializes in, for example, technology. How would you go about researching for those type of firms and finding out about their culture?
Sure. The best thing is to go and ask people, but you guys have to get better at asking good questions. In fact, the next section that I'm going to talk about is in networking. And most people ask super vanilla questions, and they're like, I can't tell the difference between the firm. That's your fault. Because you guys are asking crappy questions. So if you want to get good answers, you better ask better questions. So for example, don't ask them, what was your favorite project in the last 6 months, right? Ask them, tell me every project that you've done since you've been at the firm so I can get a representative idea, just a quick list, right? Good. Well, then all of a sudden, you get a better sample of not just the one that they're going to talk about, but more of what they've actually been able to do. Does that make sense? Everybody's writing down that question. I have no idea if I'm going to be able to successfully recover my presentation. Can you guys see that? No. Any other questions? I mean, I can see it, but whether it's going to come back up on the screen or not.
The connection, probably.
So is it on your laptop right now?
Yeah, it's on the laptop.
Is that?
It's the spinning wheel of death, though. I'm just going to restart it.
They probably should go on and check. How do you do that?
It says my computer is already shutting down, but it's clearly not already shutting down.
Take a break for now. Just take
Yeah.
a 5-minute break and then we'll sort this out.
Can do if that's all
Okay,
right.
just take a 5-minute break now and just sort this.
Great.
Sort this out.
Sorry, guys. If you guys have questions, you're welcome to keep answering them, but if you want to stand up or stretch or anything, like it won't even shut down. I can make it shut down now.
Who's filming this place? Okay.
This just fell over. It was just cracked or something. Yeah, it fell over and it just hit the connection. It seems like it's a very slow data connection between I totally don't. It'll work. Oh, somebody has a question? Yes, go ahead. Somebody has a question. Oh, goody. Ask it.
So you know how you can apply to different offices?
Yes.
From Germany.
Yes. So you guys might want to listen because he's asking a really smart question.
And I'm still baffled whether I should apply to London or Germany or both or another office which is less competitive.
Yep.
All
And
different emails.
And yeah, all with different emails. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't really have information about how, you know, what number they take or like which office is more competitive.
Totally. It is a great mystery. It is one of life's great mysteries. It's like the beginning of the universe, you know, something we may never know. Which office should you choose for consulting? But I'll give you a couple of guidelines. The first thing is I would never recommend, especially for the top firms, which I'm guessing are kind of the ones that you're talking about, that you guys would apply to an office without contacting somebody in the office. It's not that you won't get an interview there, it's just that your chances are much lower. So if you contact people in the office, you actually have a dual purpose. You can find out more about the office and whether you want to work there or not. And you can also have them tell you what your best chances are. And here's what consultants love to do. They love to advise people, right? But they don't love to advise clueless people. They like to work with smart people who have some sense of what they're doing. So if you came to me and you said, I'm thinking about applying to one of these 100 offices, which one should I apply to, right? I do not want to answer your question. But if you said, my game plan is to apply to this office first, this office second, and this office third, and here are my reasons why. How good of a plan is that? Why or why not? Then you're going to get a really good answer back from them, okay? So sometimes you guys have to like put a stake in the sand about what you think you would want first, and then be able to relate that backwards and forwards to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that help you answer your question?
Yeah.
I would say in general, if you don't have like you have the ability to work in London, right?
Again?
You have the ability to work in London?
Yeah.
So for anyone who does not have the ability to work in London, I would not apply here, okay? I do know that unless, again, you've had a conversation with somebody in the office, or you know 100% that they're totally cool with sponsoring visas and consider you equivalently. But I at least would have a conversation with people in a geography where you're eligible to work. Just because the reality is that right now it's getting even harder and harder, it seems, for people to apply for offices that are not local for them. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, let's see if this will work. Yay! Thanks guys. All right, so moving on. I had just one last slide in that section, which if consulting is right for you. Now I'm just going to work with this right now. I'm sorry that the presentation is not letting me press the play button, but I'm afraid to touch it too much. So hopefully you guys can see that for now, and then when the play becomes active again, I will press it. But basically, there are 5 things on here. If these things are not true, if you just don't apply to consulting, you will still have a successful, wonderful, beautiful life, and I'll even hug you afterwards if you decide that you don't want to do consulting. But short, focused projects are for you. If you like long durations and you like to really see the quote fruit of your labor, like you like to see things happen, this is not the field for you because you do short, quick things. You're in and you're out. Okay. High impact work, you are paid, like I said, at MBB firms, they're paying each person an average of $1 million a year. So they don't give the crappy work to the $1 million a year people, right? They give the crappy work to their like $50,000 a year people. And so you're doing high impact, important work inside an organization, which can also be high pressure. So you have to handle pressure really well. You generally are solving quantitative problems. Even if it's more qualitative type of work like risk or compliance work, it still has to be measured and quantified. And I was surprised at how quantitative the work is, how much Excel and modeling you do. I was pleasantly surprised because I probably wouldn't have naturally gotten good at that stuff on my own. So that was one of the most valuable skills that I learned when I was a part of the field. Quant problems are important. You will not get to play around with nonprofit organizations, okay? So any of you guys that love nonprofits and love social justice and love other things like that, this is not the place for you. Unless you discover that there are skills and experiences that you can really benefit from getting in a place like this. And so they, basically again, like in their presentations, all the firms were like, we have community day, and like you can volunteer, and we do work with like these really important nonprofits. And then when you come into the firm, they're like, we don't really care at all about that stuff. Like, if you care about it, good for you. But like, that's not how we get paid, that's not how you get promoted. And the reality is that that's true. And I was kind of offended by that when I came into the firm. I was like, aw, like they told me I would be able to like hug babies all day, And then when they talked about it like that, they were like, look, here's how it works. Like you come, you make money for the people that we're making money for. Like that is your job, right? And if you want to care about all those other things, you should totally do it. And while you're here, if we do a nonprofit project, like you can participate, cool. But if for some reason you're not able to do that 100% of the time, you might actually find that there are other things that you like more. So I did 2 nonprofit projects, I hated them. They were my least favorite ones. And then finally, heavy teamwork. You will work all the time with people in teams. The most classic experience that I had was that I actually worked in a trailer with a team. It was after Hurricane Katrina and the company's offices had been completely decimated. And so we literally lived in a trailer together, okay? Like that is about as close as you get for team dynamics. But you will work out with the team, you'll eat with the team, you'll travel with the team. You are with people a lot. And it's okay if you're introverted, it's not just for extroverts, but it does mean that you are working with people and have to like that. If not, you're gonna have a really unfun couple of years, okay? So if you prefer doing solo work, there are lots of great places for you, but this is not one of them. All right. So I'm going to dive into networking, and then I'll take some more questions after the networking session. I'm really sorry that I can't get this thing up there. Let me see if I can. Yeah, like it's literally.
You can zoom in if you want, I think.
What's that?
Maybe you can zoom in and onto this.
I don't like it. Like my
Control plus.
Is it Command plus on it?
Yeah. Control plus. If it works.
Like literally nothing.
Okay.
Sorry, I think it hates Macs.
Okay.
So great. So for networking, the biggest asset of any consulting firm is its people. Consulting firms use networking as a pre-interview process, okay? Consulting firms invest a huge amount of time, energy, and money in interviewing and recruiting. They estimate it's around £1 million or $1 million for each school that they target, for each of the places where they're going, which is a pretty substantial amount of time and energy and resources, right, to bring new people in through the door. And the reason is that consulting firms, basically, if you empty all the people out of the building, there's nothing left. So there's nothing else that they sell. They don't sell a product or even like an ongoing service. They just sell the brains and the personalities of the people that come in the door. So networking is a very important part of the consulting process. So the consulting process is 3 things: networking, fit interviews, and case interviews. And here, maybe I can make it a little bigger. Perhaps not. So in the networking process, a lot of people just think like all I have to do is kind of get into the case interview process and I'll be fine. But it's actually not true. The networking is important. So if you guys do what I said, like if you want to talk to somebody about an office, you might as well tell them what's great about you, which is what matters to them. And the things that matter to them are the pedigree of the school that you went to. Okay. So LSE is you guys are in a great situation. The relevance of the degree that you did. That's not just business-focused degrees. Anything that has quant work in it is considered relevant, but that's helpful and important. Your performance and your GPA, that's also super helpful. Okay, and they do want people with top performance. So if you guys don't have good scores, you need to keep them off of your resume. They still will find out at some point, but you need to lead with what's great about you. So if your scores aren't it, don't put them on there. And then finally, leadership. They're looking for you to be a three-dimensional person who's involved outside of the classroom as well. Not just a member, but actually leading organizations or societies. And they would rather see a couple of short-focused leadership experiences rather than a lot of them. The other experiences that are helpful are brand name experiences matter to organizations. This is not what I did. This was not my focus, working at the fanciest places and having the greatest experiences. But I do recognize from the inside it's helpful. You know that somebody has some previous analytical and cultured experience in a corporate environment if they come in with a brand name experience. You trust them, basically. And you trust that there are some things that they know that you won't have to teach them, which is really helpful. So brand names matter. If any of you guys are, how many of you guys are first years? Awesome. So focus on some brand name experiences on your resume. It's going to give you more options later. It doesn't mean that they're the only things that you have to do, but I would really highly recommend this. Analytical ability. So doing quant work on the job. If you have choices between the work that you do pushing for quant work, that's super helpful. Business understanding is great. So that means that if you're not doing something that is finance or economics related, that you're demonstrating how you understand what the business does, not just your activities there. And finally, consultants want to see offers to return. Okay, so they want you to have done a good job in the places that you previously worked. Out of these people, pre-MBA, post-MBA, manager, partner, and recruiters, which one is the most important group for you guys to be talking to? Raise your hand if you think it's pre-MBA. Raise your hand if you think it's post-MBA. Raise your hand if you think it's manager. Raise your hand if you think it's partner. And what about recruiters? Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions. Nobody ever agrees. For all of you guys that are doing anything up to and including a finance degree, a master's in finance degree, for example, pre-MBAs is where you focus. You want to know why? They pick who gets to interview. They don't interview you, but they pick who gets to interview you. If you know a partner, please talk to them, okay? Like if they're your buddy or your friend, like please give them a call and let them know that you would like to interview for a firm. They can get you an interview. But partners sell work, managers manage teams and projects. Post-MBAs focus on recruiting for post-MBAs. Pre-MBAs focus on recruiting for pre-MBAs. Recruiters, they do recruit, but they actually don't have any positive power. They can't get you in the door and they don't speak up in an environment. So nobody really counts their vote. So that's why you don't focus on them. 5 rules of networking. So first you have to be talking to the right person. The more junior they are, usually actually the better. At the right time, so usually as early as possible, not the week of their heightened recruiting process. You want to give some time for a relationship to develop. At the right firm, at the firm that you're looking at, not for somebody who was at the firm, they don't have any voice anymore. In the right location, so I already answered one question about locations, I'm happy to answer more. It is important that you guys have some investigation of the types of locations you might be interested in and get a sense. Like for example, if nobody writes you back from a location, I probably wouldn't go work there, right? But if somebody's super happy and friendly to write you back from another location, that's a decent sign from the very beginning. And then for the right position, you guys cannot trade down. So if you are not in your penultimate year, you can't apply for an internship. You have to apply for full-time. And if you are, have completed, for example, like another degree, like a PhD or an MBA, then in those situations, you cannot trade down to an analyst position. You have to apply for the position that you're appropriate for. It doesn't sound great when you go to a firm and you're like, I probably could do a great job at the higher level, but I'll take anything. And high performers don't talk like that. They're like, no, I will do a great job at the place where I should be inside your organization. So a couple things that are important for networking. One is getting in the door, the other is conducting research, and I talked about that really quickly. The two of those things are both, I would say, equally important for the networking process. What that means is that you guys have to focus not on transactional conversations with people, okay? I'll tell you what most of the conversations are like when people are asking about consulting. Someone comes at you and they actually interview you, right? They're like, boom, 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 boom. Here are my 10 questions about consulting. What was your favorite project? Who do you like to work with? Boom, And they never actually listen to any of your answers. Like most people, when I was at Bain, didn't listen to anything I said. They were just trying to get FaceTime with me, okay? And like, you're generally dealing with pretty smart people in these spaces. They can tell when somebody's trying to get FaceTime. And they can tell when somebody has a legitimate, real question, when they make you their advisor, and they're like, I'm thinking about these 3 offices, I talked to somebody in this office, I'm thinking about this one, do you have any insight into that? Right? Or, I have an offer from the summer, I'm thinking about recruiting again, but I haven't quite decided, what do you think are the differences between these 2 things? So you need one good question, that's it. And you need one good question per person, and then when they answer you, ask a follow-up question based on what you listened to, as opposed to your next question on your list, okay? The timeline here, which I realize is a little bit hard to see, but I'm going to kind of walk you guys through
slide
it.
bottom bit in my mark.
What's that? This one?
Slider on the bottom right.
This one?
Yeah, try that. Yeah.
Oh, yay! Okay, that's at least a little better. I can hopefully move this over too. Yeah, I don't know why the data feed is so slow. Basically, you've got, ideally this is October, right? So how many of you guys are recruiting right now? Cool, that's fine. You have to do all of this and all of this right now. Okay, you have a lot to do. And maybe some of you have done some of it, researching the consulting industry, doing some networking, identifying the target firms, preparing your resume and cover letter, and preparing for case interviews kind of up until now. That's great. If not, you guys have a lot of crash course work to do, right? You'll be busy. But all of that, plus info sessions, resumes, everything needs to happen now. But the reason that some of that has to happen early is that it's a marinating process to develop a relationship with people inside the firms. And the real top performers have actually identified where some of the key places are that they want to work, as opposed to just like, I'll be hopeful and see what happens and just kind of like crash into it at the very end, okay? I generally recommend about 2 to 3 months for case interview preparation. I think that's how you get relaxed in the case interview. I don't think you need it. Like, I did it in a short amount of time. It's totally possible. Some people can walk in with just a couple of case interviews under their belt and do great. I generally do find that working for like 12 to 18 months is way too long on case interviews because a lot of the time you kind of get burned out. So there are some things that are helpful to know about that. Any questions about networking?
When you mentioned that don't apply until you like network with someone, do you imply that you need to like really have a relationship with someone like they can recommend you?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, and in just a second I'm going to talk about the CV review process so you guys know how that works and you'll see why it's important. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, you talked about like asking good questions at
Sure.
these networking events. Can you give a few more examples of what a good question sounds like?
Sure. So, a good question, by the way, here's never ever a good question is I'm bad at something, or like I have a terrible score, I didn't get an offer, like something where you're confiding in somebody. So never ever ask a question that shows you in a negative light at all. All right, because that's the only way that they will perceive you. If you guys have those kind of questions, please ask me tonight. That's what I'm here for, okay? But other great questions they're not like smarty pants questions, right? They're literal and sincere questions. Sometimes, in fact, they'll refer back to other experiences that you've had with somebody at the firm. So, for example, like a question that I always appreciated as a woman was, if somebody came to me and they said, hey, I talked to this other person at the firm, but I'm really interested in your perspective on the support for the women's network at Bain. Could you just talk a little bit about 2 or 3 of the events that they do and what they're looking to support? Like, that was a very insightful question that told me that they were actually interested in what I was interested in. Another question was, what I'm really interested in doing while I'm at the firm is maybe specializing a little bit. I've heard that that's not really something that a lot of people do at Bain, but is there a way to include the strategic process of picking work so that I could kind of develop a little bit of an expertise? Or, can you talk a little bit more about how you're staffed on specific projects? Like something that's, kind of a deeper level question that gets to more the mechanics of the way that the firm works that would be a little different maybe between one firm or another. Does that make sense?
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and then I also like some very specific questions that have numbers in them, which is, those are the types of interview questions that they give you guys. So for example, can you tell me about one person in the last 3 months that was on a team with you that really impressed you with something that they did? A very specific question that you'll get a better specific answer to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Yeah, or another favorite one, I coach people to ask this one in final rounds, is for partners. What's one thing that you have discovered after coming to work at the firm that you didn't know before you came? right? There's something great that you love about the firm that was a surprise to you actually after the fact. Yes?
Going back to location, how helpful do you think it is to network in if you're in one location where you're trying to go to another location? For example, I'm trying to go back to New York,
Mhm.
but there's like a lot of opportunity obviously in London.
Yeah.
How helpful do you think it is to network in London?
Is not helpful at all. Yeah, it's not, like, you can get information about the firm, but that will not help you at all in the actual application process. Yeah, the only exception would be if for some reason you apply for the London office first and New York second. Like, in that situation, you know, basically, but you'd have to be ready to go work in London. So really, you should only, you know, the networking is really only useful for the offices that you're actually interested in working for. Yeah.
At one of the events, like I think I spoke specifically to BCG,
Mhm.
and they said that when you apply, you have to list, like, or maybe it was Bain, you have to list the order of preference for office.
Yep.
And that then they would bring, and like through the recruitment process, if it was done through your school, they would bring the interviewers to wherever your school is. But I was really confused as to what that meant, because you're saying that we should reach out to the office that we are looking to.
Right,
apply.
so usually at a lot of the firms, like for Bain, McKinsey, and BCG, if you guys are applying through an on-campus process, they have an on-campus team. Okay, so even if you want to go to like you know, let's say somebody here wanted to go to like the Sydney office, right? They would still interview you in London for your first round, but you would only get selected for an interview if you were interested by the Sydney office, right? So they would collaborate with all the different offices. So somebody in Sydney would be like, I want that person. They would get you into an interview slot. You would interview with the London office. You'd still have to pass the interview here. Does that make sense? But then you would either go to Sydney, or there would be enough people across the geography that would be interviewing in Sydney that they would fly a couple people from Sydney here to do the interviews.
And even in that case, it's still important to still like connect with people from that local office.
Yes, because it's the only person that would be here is one or two interviewers. Yeah. Yes.
So in terms of networking, if you do like name dropping on your cover letter, and if it actually gets read, do they actually approach the people and ask them, do you know that person?
Yeah, so let me answer that question. I'm going to go into this next session. I'm going to answer that question. The answer is yes.
Okay.
You guys want to know how the review process happens at a company like Bain or McKinsey for your CVs? So first thing that happens is that the admissions for most of the big firms close on a certain date. They're not rolling. So if you apply early, you don't get a better chance. And I know that here in particular, like there are firms, some of the boutique firms where that is more the case, so it is good to understand that, but for the most part, for the bigger firms, like the big four, the top three, they close them at a certain date. On that date, everybody whose documents have been submitted are basically compiled into one large book. At Bain, we would compile all of them. At McKinsey, from what I understand this year, they're only compiling the ones that meet certain cutoffs, like grade and other cutoffs that they're looking for. But they'll put at least everybody into, or at least some people that they've already kind of pre-selected a group for, or they'll put everybody into a book. And then we had to each, who are on the review team, individually rank them. So for LSE, there's probably going to be an LSE recruiting team that is from LSE for most of the firms, right? So it's LSE alums that are currently a couple of years in, 1 to 3 years. They could have just started like 2 months ago, by the way, but they're all gonna be in. They'll rank with a number each one of your applications. And then all those numbers are put into a spreadsheet, okay? And the first 20 people for the interviews are chosen by those numbers. They're chosen by partners who say that they want somebody to get interviewed. They're chosen pre-selected if you interviewed for an internship round. Let's say you either got the offer and turned it down to go somewhere else, and you're coming back, or you didn't get the offer but you went somewhere else that was pretty great, and then you decided you wanted to come back and recruit. They might go ahead and pre-select you for an interview. Or if you were a superstar at networking, or there were specific, for example, diversity groups that they were trying to fill, then you would be on what's called their pro list. So the first 20 slots are generally filled, like I would say 16 of them are generally filled by these like high-ranking candidates. Everybody agreed they were superstars on their documents, right? And then the rest of them are by these. I think it's pretty challenging to be in like one of these numbers, personally. So it's possible, but challenging. The abyss is the second piece, okay? And this is a group that is represents the bottom 50% in general of everyone who applies. That group was reviewed just by scrolling through their names. And if somebody was like, oh, but I love them, they're like super amazing, we should really give them an interview, that person was then moved to the to discuss pile, but not actually given an interview. Usually out of the abyss, 2 to 3 people total were moved, and all of that was based on networking, okay? And then on the to discuss list, the medium ranking candidates, so everybody who was in between the abyss and the A list, and the rescues were discussed for up to 4 hours. We would spend the time, and we would actually put their resumes up on the screen and talk through them. But we had in print, actually, we had their cover letters, we had their transcripts, and we would go through everybody's credentials and take a vote on them afterwards. So in those situations, especially for super borderline candidates, that's where if you name dropped in your cover letter at Bain, we would be like, oh, look at that. Like they would say, hey, this person says they know you, Jenny Rae. And for some people, I was like, literally no recollection, right? Like, I do not remember that person. And for others, I was like, oh, love them. Yeah, I think they would be great. And for others, I was like, yeah, we're cool, you know? So the networking process really matters. You don't have to ask for permission to put somebody's name on a cover letter, but it can be used, actually, as a part of the process, okay? And then there's a very final piece at the end of the discussion process when the votes are in and everybody's kind of, you know, decided who's going to be on the list, where they look at the whole list and they just make sure, like, hey, is this representative? You know, like, do we have, like, 100% women? Do we have no dudes? Oh, that's weird. Maybe we should interview some dudes. And so, you know, there may be some reallocation kind of toward the end of the process, right? Some specifics that consultants look for: one is Excel skills. 2 are substantial leadership roles, more substantial as opposed to just the key basic ones. And you know, I saw somebody's resume last night that had about 8 leadership experiences on there. I can't tell what they actually cared about, and you're never going to talk about that many in an interview. So 1 to 2 substantial ones. Employee or academic awards are helpful. Anything where you distinguish yourself amongst your peers. 1 to 2 diverse experiences. So you know, creativity and wildness is actually really valued amongst the firm. So having like a consistent, like, I love finance or I love healthcare, it's not required, especially at your level. But you also, I mean, I have seen people that are really random, right? They'll be like dentistry and, you know, physics or something like that. And you're like, whoa. So having a little bit of a theme is good, or at least having some kind of cohesive story. And then top scores in competitive situations. So they want to see good grades. For most of the firms too, you're going to put your like GCSEs or A levels on there, and that matters to them. Well-roundedness is also key. So branding for excellence in one area is not better than balance. Balance beats it. So having a combination of experience, leadership, and academics, and strength in each one of those is great. Consultants are looking for well-rounded people. So key things that consultants say that they look for but don't really care about. One is your entrepreneurial experience. How many of you guys did something that's been entrepreneurial in the last couple of years? Okay, not a lot of you. I'll skip over it then. Non-relevant leadership. So if you guys were, like, for example, part of a salsa dancing club, president of the salsa dancing club, right? You know, you can put that on there, but they're going to then picture you dancing salsa as opposed to, you know, maybe like doing more professional things. So you kind of want to stick with things that are more relevant in nature. That doesn't mean that they're business or consulting only. It just means that you were like working in a team with a computer, right? You know, wearing normal clothes. Case or consulting related activities, super hard to tell whether you did great or somebody else did great. So it demonstrates interest in the field but not distinction. So you don't need those. You can put them on there but don't need them. Lots of activities, not better than a few that are key. General awards, just blah, and then industry certifications, if they want them, they'll give them to you. Okay. So the anatomy of a CV is just basically your heading. At the top, your name and your contact info. You guys do not need an overview. There are 3 major sections: education, experience, and leadership. You should have all 3 of them. You should not just have one experience section that has education and leadership together, because at your level, they are looking for people who are well-rounded and deep in all of those areas. Publications and presentations you don't need, and then also personal. Let me tell you what happens though. There'll be a firm, like yesterday somebody said, hey, Capgemini says you should always put an overview. Guess what you should do? Put an overview, right? If they say they want it in purple, put it in purple. Okay, but for the most part, what you guys need to do is come up with a really good, solid resume that you only have to make these little baby tweaks to if somebody in the firm says. So I don't recommend having 40 different resumes, one that's tailored to each specific firm. You need a good resume that you can use for all of your job applications just to keep yourself sane. Okay, and then just a little bit of a tweak at the end for maybe a couple of specific things. A couple of do's and don'ts. Do not group anything beyond the sections that I talked about into skills-based areas like research experience and project experience. It's confusing and it's really hard for somebody to tell what your story is. In consulting, a story is chronological format. What happened when? Okay? Too little detail is not helpful because it's really difficult sometimes to see what you did or what the organizations that you worked for were focused on. So that can be a big challenge. A lack of consistency, like I've seen so many nasty resumes that just, like literally I just look at them and want to throw up because you can't tell what is happening where and they have different kinds of models and systems going on, so pick one theme and use it from beginning to end. And then 1 to 2 pagers, if you guys were reviewing 500 resumes, how many pages would you like to see?
1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even if a firm says that they will review a 2-pager, I've very seldom seen a 2-pager that I think is better than a 1-pager. Okay. Tips for CV editing. So font size between 10 and 11.5 point font, and everything should be single spaced. A lot of people try to use like paragraph controls to space stuff, and it ends up being disjointed throughout the resume. So single spacing is helpful. You should also have spaces in between each of your sections and each of your entries. Promotions and return offers. Include them. They want to see them. The consulting firms aren't threatened, and you're not negotiating. You can't negotiate, actually. If you negotiate, they'll just laugh at you and be like, no, this is a take it or leave it situation. And that's true, like at any firm, anywhere, they all pay their people the same amount, base salary. The only difference is just that you get like little tweaks of differences in your bonus. And then irrelevant experience, like I already talked about. You don't have to have everything on here. You guys do not have to explain every minute of your life up until the moment that you graduate, right? So if you took a summer off-ish, or you did like 1 week during the summer, cool, no big deal. If you like the rest of the summer were, doing something totally ridiculous, or you were like doing a job that you don't want to include, like being a waiter or waitress somewhere, just don't put it on there. It's totally fine. You do want to kind of generally explain your overall timeline, so like I would recommend during that time that you put something, but just the relevant stuff. And then in every line of content, you have to have context, quantification, so there must be a number in every line on your resume. If you can't come up with a number for it, take it off. Nobody's going to read it anyhow. And then achievements, so what you accomplished or what the results were. And then the content, context is actually for the project that you did, so kind of the overall like firm or company, as well as for each of the different individual items that you did. Okay? Here's just really quick before and after. I know that some of you guys in the back will have a hard time seeing this, but I'll just walk through it really quickly. There's the same amount of stuff on this one and this one, but this had no white space in between the whole sections, and there were multiple sections: work experience, education, leadership and development, campus and community involvement. What we wanted was to really emphasize the work experience. So there are 3 pieces, still big ones: education, experience, leadership, and there's the small personal section. But we chose out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 leadership and development and campus and community involvement experiences 2 to highlight, because it shows better that he was cared about and was involved in 2 things. And this is all he's going to talk about and walk me through your resume anyhow, inside the actual document. And we moved a couple of the things into the experience section and really focus on just those. And then we still have a couple of things on there. We have one under a leadership bullet and one under a volunteer bullet, but those are just a lot less emphasized. One more slide on a cover letter, and then I'll take questions on resumes and cover letters. So there are 2 types of cover letters. The first one is chronological, which is when you tell your story from beginning to end. And that one, you usually put the why the firm at the end of the story. Okay, so it's kind of like why consulting and why the firm in 1 paragraph. The other type is a bullet point format, where you put the why the firm at the beginning of the story. Either one of them works. Some of them work better for different stories. Like if you guys have a linear story that totally makes sense, chronological might be great. If you have a jumpy story, or you did your coolest or most quote important thing, maybe a year ago, you might want to make it a bullet point story. At the beginning, you don't need to put your address on the cover letter, just the, you don't need to put the firm's address, you just need to put your address. The focus for a cover letter is on you, not on the firm. There are a lot of firm cover letters that I got at Bain that were like, Bain is amazing. And I was like, how do you know? You don't work here. So the focus needs to be on I am amazing, right? So you're talking about what you've done really well. That's what I'm reading the cover letter for. 1 to 2 deep stories are way better on a cover letter as opposed to a recap of the resume. You guys want to know, in general, what most people use a cover letter for? It's a writing sample. It's basically what it is. It's an essay, a writing sample. And a really wonderful cover letter, honestly, doesn't do anything that's better than someone else's if they're equally well written. They end up being about the same. So personalize it, make it about you, make one cover letter, but do not kill yourselves writing 100 different cultivated, unique cover letters. They aren't used as much in the process as you would probably think. But they are important if it comes down to like a tiebreaker situation. If you don't have one, or if it's not well written, that does reflect on you and you will be thrown out of the process. So if you submit one, it needs to be a total awesome one. You want to make sure that you remove any weak language, like I feel or I believe, from the document. Use things like I am confident instead. Include specific keywords if you are interested in technology consulting. By the way, technology consulting, I don't want to make it sound like I was poo-pooing it earlier. It's the largest and the fastest growing field of consulting. And so it's like if you are working in technology consulting, BCG, for example, this year is hiring 80 people before the end of the year for a new technology consulting group that they've developed inside their company. So there are lots of great opportunities to work in technology consulting. But that really specifically focuses on those. And then one paragraph, and one paragraph alone, focuses on the firm, and the focus of it is on what you talked about when you were networking with people in the firm. So I never would want to see in one of your documents something that you read on their website or an article that they published. If you guys got that advice from somebody else, it's totally bogus. Because when somebody's reading that document, guess how many days at Bain I sat around reading our website? It's 0. Okay, and guess how many articles while I was at Bain I read that we ourselves published? 0, okay? So you are not connecting with me as a person at all if you put that kind of stuff in there. So you have to emphasize rather, like I sat down and had a 20-minute conversation with this person and they highlighted this one project that they did at Bain and how incredible it was, and these are the things that they noted, and that's why I want to now come work for Bain, okay? More personal and just better-ish in general. Great, any questions? Yes?
In terms of applying to a specific office, do you think you should then tailor your cover letter to that office if you...
Not really. They should already know why you want to work in the office verbally, if you've done a good job.
So, but with name dropping and things like that?
Then yes, you can just change like the names of the people.
Okay.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and like I said, they do ask if you're kind of in that tiebreaker situation. So if somebody in the room was like, oh, they said they talked to you, Jenny Rae, that would be better than being like, oh, they talked to this random person in Boston that we've never met.
But what is if the person's not in the room? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be the 5.
If the person isn't in the room, then it's kind of just thrown out the door. They don't like get them on the phone or email them or something like that. Yeah.
How long is too long for a cover letter before they get forward?
How long do you think? How long do you want? How long is your cover letter?
Is 3/4 of a page too long?
No, it's fine. Yeah, up to 1 page is fine. Just no more than 1 page. Just the most important thing actually for cover letters are short paragraphs, right? So consultants are like, oh, I could do that, like 3 sentences, They're able to keep going. But if they look at 5 whole sentences all back to back, you're like, wow, that's going to be hard work right there. Yes.
So I've just got a question about the different types of consulting.
Yep.
So you mentioned technology consulting earlier.
Yep, guys, can you just speak up a little bit so everybody can hear you?
Yeah, so just wondering, because you mentioned technology consulting earlier, because I think there's a general perception or trend that strategy consultancy is the greatest consultancy, is the most prestigious one.
Yep.
So coming from your experience, could you talk more about the different types of consultancy and the pros and cons of each one, and what do you
Sure.
think?
I mean, one of the reasons why that is that I could go do any kind of consulting. From Bain, I could go to a technology consulting firm, right? So I think sometimes do you guys have chutes and ladders or snakes and what's it called, snakes and ladders? Yeah. So it's kind of like your career is a little bit like that. right? You know, and basically you get that like one really long ladder at the beginning if you start out in consulting, from where you can go down as much as you want to from anywhere else, but you kind of get every door open to you. There's literally nothing that you cannot do after consulting. The only thing is maybe like it's just maybe challenging to go into investment banking, but even then you could probably still get in. So from strategy consulting in particular, you have like the highest ladder and the most opportunities. Does that make sense?
Okay.
But if you already know that you like technology consulting, or you just want to like go get great experience working on teams and for other firms, like all of the other firms have the same benefits of just a consulting job, right? Lots of learning, lots of training, lots of tools, and plenty of jobs afterward that you could potentially want to go do. It's just that, you know, you have the most. My mom told me when I was dating, it doesn't really matter how many people you date, you only end up marrying one anyhow, you know? So like, you know, when you go to consulting, you have like 5,000 jobs that you could get, but it doesn't really matter. You only take one afterwards anyhow. So that's why I think like people are generally get really hyped up about this stuff, but like, you guys are all gonna be employed, you know? Right? And you're gonna have jobs and you're hopefully gonna like a lot of what you do there. And so ultimately, like, it doesn't really matter how many jobs you get, you still only pick one to do at the end of the day. Okay, yeah.
In terms of internships, how important is it from the recruiter's side to know that someone's already had an internship in a consultancy firm, or is it crucial, or is it just beneficial?
Sometimes interning for another consulting firm, not that one, is bad. Okay, because it's like you learned a skill set that they're gonna have to untrain before they retrain you. So yeah, it's totally true. Like not all consulting is created equal, and definitely like having those kinds of experiences isn't necessarily beneficial. So yeah, I would prefer actually that you guys did either a finance or a name brand like GMO experience. As opposed to another consulting firm experience over the summer. But the one thing that is important to say is that you guys cannot use consulting recruiting in your penultimate year as a trial run, because if you try to do that, they won't ask you back if you fail a first round interview. Okay? Like if you go in and you bomb the first round, they're like, that was cool, we saw you once. Like we're just gonna give that slot to somebody else the next time around. So please be aware that actually it's harder to get an internship, you have to prepare more for it, and it's not a trial run, because I do forget to say that sometimes, and it's important for people to know. Does that help though? Yeah, so if you, like, what you really should do in your penultimate year is something you think you would like to do forever, right? Because the whole point is you go in and you get a job offer that you think you would like, and maybe you're even totally done with the recruiting process. Okay, so that's the number one rule. But then out of all of the choices that could be included in that, I would pick one at like a more general management position or finance instead. Mm-hmm. Great, let's talk about interviews. Okay, one last question. Mm-hmm.
You said before to include a return offer on your CV.
Yep.
What do you exactly mean by that? Like include it as a bullet point?
Yep. Just say like I received an offer to return. Yeah. And do you guys know why? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an objective way of saying that you're a good performer, right? So talking about the interview process now, I'm going to talk about fit and case interviews. And obviously I realize like, you know, we're going to spend 8 hours on this on Saturday. Like what I'm doing now is not able to do it justice by any means, but it is important to know. So the first thing is that in a case, somebody can come in and absolutely do brilliantly in a case and not get passed on. And they come to me and they're like, I don't know what happened. And I'm like, well, the fit interview, which is both the questions that they ask you and also just their assessment of what kind of relationship you could have, for example, with an executive, is a very important part of the interview process. Okay, and so most people think it's all about your score on the case interview, and then you have to be like average on the fit interview. It's actually the other way around. You have to pass a bar for the case interview, and of all the people that pass a bar, they pick the ones that they like the best. Okay? So don't focus all of your preparation time just on the case interview, right? So some key questions you guys need to prepare for. One is walk me through your resume. How long do you have to walk through your resume in the interview?
1 minute.
You actually have about 2 minutes. You definitely don't have longer than 2 minutes. 1 minute can be quite short. in an interview, just because you want to get the sense that there's so much to talk about, but you're clear and structured. So 2 minutes is actually kind of a real sweet spot for that. For every other question, however, the answers need to be 1 minute long. And the biggest problem that most people have is that you communicate like a 21-year-old and not like an executive, which means that they can't put you in front of an executive. An executive communicates in short, thoughtful, clear sound bites. If you guys have ever studied executive communication, you'll notice that especially as people progress throughout their careers, they get shorter and more direct in the way that they speak as opposed to more long-winded. So walk me through your resume is a very important question. Why consulting is really, why are you a good fit for consulting? What would you like about it? How would you be great at it? Why the firm is specifically, I spoke to someone at the firm and this is what they told me. Very similar to that paragraph in your cover letter. Okay? And then strengths and weaknesses. Consultants really like to have a good balance between strengths and weaknesses. Okay? And that what they want you to know is that you're good at some things and not good at other things. When you guys walk into a company, that's going to be your job to identify for them, right? What are you good at? What are you bad at? What do you need to do differently? What should you keep? And so they need to know that you have an assessment of those together. But they also, like, when I was at Bain, I got 17 reviews, right? I told you that they do all those reviews. I don't mean 17 people reviewed me. I mean 17 times my mentor sat down with me with an actual review with multiple people's reviews in it. And every single one of those times, guess how many times they told me I was just absolutely super wonderful and had nothing to change. None. Zero. They were like, right? So in the sales process, you go in through consulting and they're like, oh, you're amazing. We love you. You're super smart. You should totally come here. On day one, you arrive and they're like, right. You know, sit down, shut up, you don't know anything, and we're going to teach you, right? You're an amoeba. That's what they tell you from when you start. And so they walk you through it. Like at Bain, it was a 16-point assessment process. So basically like what it was that day number 1, they were like, oh, good for you. You got one thing right. 16 out of the, of 16 total things, you got 1 right. You got 15 to work on. And then the next review, they were like, look at you, 2 right. How about that? You're making progress. So, so they have these like assessment processes. You have to be good at accepting constructive feedback. Okay? If you're not, it's going to be really, really hard for you to succeed. Story questions. The remainder of the questions, not direct questions, are stories that you want to tell. Okay? And at Management Consulted, we use the CAR framework. 20 seconds of context, 20 seconds of actions, and 20 seconds of results to walk through your overall stories. And the stories cover things like teamwork. Remember how I mentioned like you're in teams all the time? They may ask you actually 10 different questions just about teams. Conflict and reconciliation. Wrong answers there are, I've never had a conflict with anybody. You're like, oh heavens, oh dear. Where have you been hiding? And then achievement, like how did you push through usually some kind of challenge to achieve something? And then communication. So when something was challenging, how did you bravely communicate about it and maintain a good relationship with people in the end? For these story questions, you guys need a minimum of 6 stories and ideally about 15 at your level that you're prepared to tell. They all need to fit in 1 minute. They all need to have happy endings. I love it when I get the stories, like when I'm coaching people and I'm like, oh, tell me about a time you had a conflict with somebody, and they're like, oh yeah, this person was really difficult to work with, and so I went and talked to them about it. The end. And I'm like, well, what happened? And they're like, oh, we just never talked again. I'm like, well, that's not a good story. That's a good setup, but it's not a good story. So you have to make sure that those stories have happy endings at the end of the day. Your stories, your 6 basic stories should come from 6 different experiences that you had, which include academic experiences, leadership experiences, and your overall work experiences. So they need to convey a variety of experiences. Otherwise, somebody has 6 great experiences from like an investment banking summer. So you're like, oh, I did great this summer. I resolved a conflict this summer. I achieved something this summer. And I'm like, wow. Because of their environment, they did great, but I don't see any consistency in that across your different experiences. The one question you have to know the answer to, what's that? Yes? Why should we hire you? Yeah, I would say that probably the easiest thing to do in an interview is to prepare for an interview at the undergraduate level in particular is to focus on the answer to this question, okay? Because most people wander in the door with absolutely no sense and a hope and a prayer. And if I say, like, why should I hire you? You're like, I don't know. Like, please take me. Right? And so honestly, you guys, just preparing at the basic level for all of these questions, and especially that why we should hire you question, you will surpass 50% of your peers, okay? But it's not as hard as you think it is to actually do really well, and especially in this portion of the interview. And I would say if you have the time, 20 hours of preparation will make you an absolute rock star, but a minimum of 5 hours of out loud preparation is kind of what's required here, all right? And your elevator pitch and your hero story, so your elevator pitch is a 30-second version of this, and a 30-second version of walk me through your resume. Your hero stories are the 6 stories that I was talking about before. If we had time, I would have somebody come up and demonstrate it. We will do that on Saturday, but I want to make sure I leave enough time at the end. We have to give up the room at 7 o'clock, so I want to leave enough time for some final questions. And then a few key tips to sound like a consultant, 30-second to 1-minute responses. If you waffle or waver or wander through a story at the end, just come back and summarize it for me. And finally, be yourself. You guys should smile in your interviews. Please smile at the people that you're interviewing with. Some of you come in and you look so serious, like you're just, you know, like you need to eat a banana or something like that. And you know, it creates compassion in the interview, but not necessarily camaraderie. So what you're looking for is to be the most fun and fabulous and interesting interview of somebody else's day. All right, and if you're able to do that, be yourself and smile at them. I would say in a fit interview, you need to smile at least 3 times. When they ask you at the beginning, walk me through your resume with one story where you think you're particularly interesting, and hopefully at the end when they ask you, you know, why should we hire you? Okay, you're welcome to smile more, but at least those 3 times, remind yourself to smile. And then the fit interview prep plan, you need to prepare your stories during the networking process. I recommend writing them out. I just think that we're not as smart as we think we are. So it's amazing. Like a lot of people think, hey, there aren't going to be any pop questions or things that I don't know the answer to here, you know, because it's all my experience. I don't have to prepare for it. And then you start talking and you're like, oh my God, I just told such a ridiculous version of that story. It doesn't make any sense. So just make sure that it's really clear. Make sure that you practice it out loud. And practice with a partner as well. I've found that over my lifetime that people that are really good at this, that get into consulting firms, are successful probably more than anything because of this skill. The ability to tell a story well, to highlight in verbal communication what they did well, and to demonstrate that they were successful without bragging or being arrogant. Okay, so it's a real talent, and if you don't have it, it's something you can acquire. The final section is on case interviews. Everybody take out a piece of paper and a pen, please. We're going to do a little quick exercise here. Awesome. I want you guys to quantify the number of passengers that travel on the tube system, the underground in particular, in London in a given year. I'll give you 2 minutes.
You mean number of trips?
Nope, number of passengers.
So if I travel today, tomorrow, and like I still consider this once.
Incorporate it into your structure. I like your question though. I like the way you're thinking. 30 seconds. All right, tell your partner, somebody sitting next to you, what number you got. Okay, great, that's good. Raise your hand if you got the same number as the person sitting next to you. Hey everybody. Okay, you guys can stop. I unleashed the beast. Hey, you guys can stop. Okay, so I asked a question, I'll ask it again. How many of you got the same number as the person sitting next to you?
Roughly the same.
You guys got roughly the same?
Yeah.
Wow, that's kind of unusual. So here's what I want to talk about. First of all, based on the numbers that you got, if all of you guys shouted out your number, I would have no idea who would be a good consultant or not. Okay? Because one of the things that's really interesting about case interviews is that you actually have to talk through your whole process in order for somebody to understand the way that you think. But I would be able to tell a little bit from your notes. So how many of you guys had clear notes? Nobody's willing to show them. Your note taking is super important, and it's honestly one of the things that can be really challenging, especially if you take digital notes in classes, just to kind of get used to writing and thinking and talking again at the same time. Usually a process like this would take about 2 minutes just to come up with the structure. And your structure should be somewhere between 5 and 7 steps. How many fell within about 5 to 7 steps for this? Great. But not all of you would be able to actually finish it, which is just one of the easy ways that they would say, okay, great, there's one person who can do it and one person who can't. Some of you probably were really dicey in the way that you went through your assumptions process. And so one of the things, I'm going to talk just about case interviews for a couple of minutes here. But one of the things that you guys really have to know here is that a consultant may in an interview ask you a question like that, but they don't know the answer to. Okay? And they can still evaluate whether you would be a good consultant, because it really is not about the answer that you get to, it's about the process that you use to get to the answer. And not only like the structure process, but the way that you write it down and talk through it that will help make them comfortable with your ability to handle and own work on the job. All right, so I would love to do more and more problems like that. I absolutely love those kinds of questions, but I just want to kind of walk you guys through a couple of other high-level things. So case interviews are following a basic anatomy, and one of the things that I find that people don't know a lot of the time, like when I ask a question like that, by the way, a lot of you guys just did a great job. You're just like, all right, let's do this. You jumped in. But that right there, honestly, that attitude is something that every firm is looking for, which is why you guys are going to be amazing professionals. Like when I say go do something, you're like, no idea how, but I guess I'll go try, And so at the beginning, the background is the equivalent of like, here's the job that I have for you to do. The recap is when you retell the information back. From that, the case and objective clarification is when you make sure you understand what you're going to do. So what's your name?
Alex.
Alex. So Alex asked me, are we talking about trips or riders? That's a really valid question. In this situation, I was like, just whichever one you think, and he was like, well, I think I want to do it based on the number of trips, because that's easier probably to figure out, because you don't have to figure out unique riders or how many numbers there are. But then I said riders, right, just to make it harder for you.
But trips just would make more sense, because like if you ask a question, you should know why would you want it. Like knowing how many riders, it doesn't just make any value to it.
What if you want to know how many Oyster cards you're going to deliver?
So that will depend to writers.
Yeah, so right here we don't exactly know why we're asking. Sometimes you're going to be given more context, not always. Yeah. So, so I understand what you're saying, and you had a valid question. You guys can ask those kinds of questions, and it is good when you ask questions to know what you think the answer should be or why you're asking the question. A lot of people waste, by the way, a lot of time in cases just asking random questions here, because when I give you a background on a problem, I'm essentially saying, like, this is a problem that took a company 6 months and 6 people that were really smart with lots of tools to solve. Like, go figure it out in a really short amount of time. You know, I'm essentially asking you to, like, cure cancer in 20 minutes. You know, it's not possible to actually do it well, but I am looking to see if you have the general style and approach that would make it possible, okay? The grand pause, which is when you take some time in the case to think about something. So that 2 minutes that I just gave you guys was the grand pause, all right? What we would have done if we had the time to actually walk through the process is the game plan, which is when you would come back and you'd tell me, in this situation, you wouldn't tell me the numbers that you wrote, you would just tell me the structure. So does somebody have a quick structure they can walk me through? Do you have one? Did you write it down? No? Anybody? You have one?
Well, you could do population of London.
Okay.
Plus tourist population kind of thing.
Okay.
Classify them in age bands.
Great.
Say, I don't know, till 5% of the...
So allocate them by percentages.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also say how many percentage of this total population is actually in that age band. And then multiply.
Great. And so that right there would be a game plan for a market sizing question, okay? And we would have to go through maybe some more things, because that would just probably give us the number of riders, not necessarily the number of trips. And also, you know, we'd have to make sure that, for example, the capacity made sense. Like, we might want to check it against something else. So you might want to go into just a little bit more detail. But generally, your game plan is, I've got these 5 steps that I'm going to walk through, and these are the steps that I'm going to walk through. Doesn't have to be a perfect plan, doesn't have to be unchangeable, it just has to be a plan that you're clear and confident about. Then there are 2 types of questions inside the cases. Quantitative, which are what all market sizing questions are by nature, right? Here are the numbers that I'm assuming, and here's the math that I'm going to do for them. And then creative questions, which are either brainstorming or interpretation, all right? You go backwards and forwards in cases between the 2 of those if the case is a little bit longer. In a market sizing question, you just do all of this, basically quantitative questions, a little bit of interpretation in the summary at the end. And then case summary and next step is where you kind of wrap it all up together. So there are 4 types of frameworks that we use at Management Consulted to just help people understand essentially how you can solve any case. Market sizing is the first one and the one that we recommend to start with. I've never ever met someone at Bain, McKinsey, or BCG who could not do one of these fluidly, right? It might not mean that every time that they do it perfectly. It just means that confidently they can break a big problem down into small pieces and get an answer. Doesn't mean it's the right answer, it just means it's an answer that makes sense. Profitability, which is the most important metric for any business from an operating basis, is the type of case that comes up the most often. There's actually a book that we have on our recommended resources on the website. It's not ours, but it's a book about how to use only the profitability framework to solve every case, which is super handy if you want to have like one tool, you know? But profit, a lot of people, again, skip over this one or skip over this one because they think, oh, that's easy, I can do that, let's go to the hard stuff. And then you end up complicating your brain. So focus up here, I would say, for the first at least 10 to 15 cases that you do. Make sure you understand how to solve a whole bunch of cases like this. The other 2 that are a little bit more complicated but also can be helpful, market study and mergers and acquisitions, all right? And all of these are based on the actual way that at an MBB firm we really go through the process. So they're not the academic structures that you would find in like case in point. They're actually like, these are the things that you would do. So we could go into a lot more detail about each one of those, but tonight we're not going to be able to. If you guys have specific questions, we can answer them at the end. In the case interview, you guys are being scored in the first round, usually numerically, okay? And you're being scored by question. This would be an example question key. Usually you're trying to aim for the top 2 buckets, 4 or 5. 5 is hard, to be honest, like, or 4 for McKinsey is hard. It's essentially, you know, this is like I would do it. For somebody with no training, that's just hard to do. But 4s and 5s are generally consistently what you're looking for to get passed on. If you make a mistake in the math, will you get passed on?
If you realize it in time, it's no problem.
Yeah, maybe. Honestly, like even if you don't realize it, you still might get passed on because a lot of the other pieces of your case might be there, and they may be comfortable with the way that you do your math, but just realize that you made a mistake, okay? There's grace, was what I'm saying in the interviews, you guys, for you to make mistakes. If you make mistakes and kick yourself and quit and, you know, demonstrate really bad, like, overall process, then yeah, it's really difficult, especially if you make a math mistake to get through. But just making a mistake in the case interview is actually a pretty natural part of the process. Best case scenario is not making one or catching it yourself, but it's not the only way. Because there's this pretty broad process that measures multiple different questions and multiple different things inside the cases, okay? And then your numbers are put into a total and an average, which are put into a spreadsheet, and in that spreadsheet you get put into 3 categories again, right? People who definitely make it to final round, people who definitely don't, and then people that they have to talk about kind of at the end of the day. All right, and that's also where office preference might weigh in. Like if you are going to an office that's maybe a little bit less popular, you might get passed with a lower overall average score in the first round, okay? In the second round, you're usually interviewing with a partner or a senior manager. They vote yes or no, right? Just thumbs up or thumbs down. Super quick process. They don't write a whole bunch of stuff and take a whole bunch of notes on you. Sometimes the interviews will feel very short. In fact, they'll be like, oh, let's do a case. Now let's stop the case. Sometimes that's a good thing. It means they saw what they needed to see from you, okay? So you are generally being scored. The scoring is just different between the rounds. So just a couple of tips for case interviews. The first thing is that you must act like a consultant. Structure means that you break a big problem down into smaller pieces, okay? So for any of you guys that in the process before when I asked you that question and gave you 2 minutes to do it, if you couldn't write down enough to get you all the way to an answer, you've got to get faster at breaking problems down, all right? Just because you're not going to get perfect at it, you'll never get perfect at it, but speed is important when you're doing a timed out loud process. You have to get good at problem solving. Problem solving means, again, that you're prioritizing the things that matter only and not prioritizing the things that don't. So one of the biggest problems that I find are that people that are super intellectually curious sometimes have a very hard time with cases because they're like, but I want to know about this, and this is also interesting, and this is also challenging, right? And then by the end of the case, you're like, yeah, you're interested in everything, and we still haven't solved the actual problem. So what that means is that I hire you, you come on the job, you're interested in everything, lots of shiny things, woo, super interesting, and you come back to me with something that's not clear, right? That doesn't factor in the most important things that a client wanted to know about. And then communication. You guys, one of the cool things about consulting, like you don't get an audience with the CEO, like you and the CEO, you know, chumming up and having dinner on your first time on the job, right? But you do get to sit in the room with them, and later you get to talk, and later you get to lead work with them, and later you actually get to be like left alone to ask them specific questions. And so that process is pretty damn exciting. So you have to be able to communicate with the CEO from day one. They're not going to take you through training on how to do that, right? They'll give you some expectations, but they'll generally assume that you guys are pretty good at that in the first place. Some things that help people successfully here, the first one is managing your time. In general, if you can do most cases, time yourself within 15 minutes, right? That means you're managing your time well. Otherwise, even if you give yourself the full time that you would have in a case interview, you're not prioritizing the most important things, okay? So 15 minutes for every case should be what you should be able to do to solve it. Just cut through the fat. Just get to the point really quickly. Make sure that you're prioritizing the key issues. So there's 2 types of structure. Most people get pretty good in cases at what I call horizontal structure, which is where you break a big problem down into smaller pieces. Then if I ask you to cross off every piece except for the only one that you want to look at, everybody's like, oh God, no, right? I want to keep it, I want to save everything. And you have to become ruthless about focusing on the most important thing. You might not always get it right, but over time you will get smarter at that. So you have to also include some interpretation about what's happening in the case. If you sit back in your interview and let somebody else kind of tell you what they want to do, not a good indication that you're going to do a great job on the job in the field. You know, the reality is that your first day on the job, I may ask you a question just like the one that I asked you guys. Right? Now you have other tools at your disposal. You don't just have to sit at your desk and write it down. You can go do some research and go talk to people, but you are responsible for making the plan for how you're going to do that and coming back with a deliverable. Again, cool thing about it, they trust you guys to be smart, healthy, really intelligent, contributing people, but it also means you have to take a lot of ownership over pushing to what the person who's asking the question really wants to hear. And finally, probably most importantly, smile in a case interview. Okay, not a lot of people smile. People who smile seem like they're confident, having a little bit of fun, and like they're owning the situation. And so smiling can be a really good thing. When you actually are enjoying yourself, it's a good indication that that's what you would want to be doing afterwards. So if you guys have other questions, you all have our business card. If you don't, make sure that you grab one. Naman, come on up here to the front. Just go ahead and run up here. And but basically, we have a YouTube channel with 52 free videos on it, email, Twitter, Google Plus, everything that's like that. And then in addition, basically, if you guys are able to join us on Saturday, we have a couple of tickets left. I think there's like 8 tickets left maybe. So we'd love to have you if you're able to come on Saturday. Okay? I'm going to take 2 final group questions and then we'll stick around for general questions. Does anybody have any group questions about the interview process? Fit interviews or case interviews? Go ahead, just speak up, please. Hey guys, can you just be quiet for just 1 second, please? So what I would just direct you to there, we have on our website a recommended reading section, which is all of the books that we recommend for case interviews. There are some that are on there and they're kind of in order of priority, basically. So that's what I would go to. Just go and check that out and that'll be your best resource. It's a free section of our website. Okay? Any other questions? Great, like Naman said, he's got 10 books, so if you guys want to grab one of those. If you have cash, it's best. We do have a credit card reader, but we haven't gotten it to work so far on the trip, so that would be awesome. And then if you have questions, I'll stick around here until they absolutely kick us out of the room, and then I'll move outside and answer questions until you guys have them. Thank you guys so much.